The breathing corpse. Can a corpse that has been hanging for 30 minutes prevent its own autopsy? Picture the dark cellar of Oxford University in 1650. On a stone table lies the cold body of a woman fresh from the gallows. The razor-sharp surgical blade is ready. But the moment the cold steel touches her flesh, a horrific sound freezes the doctors in their tracks. A raspy wheeze from her throat. The corpse's chest begins to heave. Eyes that had long been fixed suddenly flutter. How could someone declared dead by law, religion, and medicine perform history's greatest prison break right on the dissecting table? 17th century England was a place devoid of mercy. Anne Greene, a 22-year-old maid, was sentenced to death for concealing a birth, a harsh law of the time. On December 14, 1650, under Oxford's grey skies, Anne ascended the scaffold. The rope tightened. Following protocol, she dangled for 30 minutes. To ensure she was dead, Anne's friends even clung to her legs, using their full body weight to pull her down, hoping a quick death would end her suffering. After doctors confirmed her pulse had stopped and her breath had vanished, Anne's body was placed in a coffin and sent straight to Oxford University's laboratory. To the world, Anne Greene was a name written in the Book of the Dead, but when the coffin lid opened, a terrifying sight made Oxford's finest minds shudder. Instead of a cold cadaver, Dr. William Petty and Dr. Thomas Willis noticed a strange warmth emanating from her. A faint hiccup echoed. Then, a ragged breath. The corpse they were about to dissect was fighting to claw its way back from the hands of the Grim Reaper. The deathly silence of the anatomy room was shattered by a weak but resilient heartbeat. Anne Greene was not dead. She had survived an execution where, theoretically, the survival rate was an absolute zero. How did this miracle happen? Imagine the human body as a smartphone. When faced with extreme cold or severe trauma, it enters maximum power-saving mode. The December weather in Oxford that year was like needles piercing the skin. This cold slowed Anne's metabolism, allowing her brain to survive despite a critical lack of oxygen. Additionally, it is possible her neck cartilage did not fully fracture, or the rope shifted, creating a microscopic survival gap just enough for a tiny amount of blood to still reach her brain. Upon noticing her breath, doctors poured warm wine into her mouth and massaged her limbs with hot oils, a primitive resuscitation method akin to rekindling a dying ember in a storm. After hours of drama, Anne regained consciousness. Not only did she live, but she was so healthy that the authorities granted her a pardon, believing it was a divine miracle. Anne Greene lived for another 15 years, married, and had children, carrying a keloid scar on her neck as a permanent reminder of the thin line between two worlds. Death's melody. What sound makes you shiver most in a silent morgue? Not a scream, but a snore. Low, rhythmic, and dull. A normal sound in a bedroom, but an absolute nightmare when it comes from inside a black plastic bag labeled corpse. How could three specialist doctors with decades of experience all sign the death warrant of a man who was still breathing loudly? In the modern world, we trust in machines and highly trained medical minds. When prisoner Gonzalo Montoya was found unconscious in his cell in Spain, no pulse, no breath, body ice cold, medicine boldly declared the end. He was zipped into a plastic bag and moved to the morgue to await the scalpel that would determine his cause of death. But just as forensic staff prepared to place him on the table, the chest inside the black plastic began to heave. A snore tore through the silence. When the zipper opened, they didn't find a decomposing body. They found a man, fast asleep. Gonzalo didn't come back to life. The truth was even more terrifying. He had never died. The culprit was catalepsy. Imagine the body acting like a hibernating bear. To survive a storm of illness, in this case an extreme epileptic seizure, the body automatically cuts all contact with the outside world. The heart rate slows to a point where it mimics a leaking faucet, dripping drop by drop instead of flowing, rendering even the most modern stethoscopes blind. Blood pressure and oxygen levels drop so low that even a doctor's sharpest senses are deceived. He wasn't dead, he was simply invisible, to death in a state of perfect biological standstill to protect the brain. Gonzalo Montoya Jiménez woke up on the operating table, narrowly escaping the scalpel. He survived to tell his tale, but the story leaves a deep sense of unease. It reminds us that no matter how advanced science becomes, it is still a child learning to read the language of life. One must wonder, how many corpses in history failed to snore before the blade touched their skin? Death is not always a loud bang. Sometimes it is a deceptive silence. Cherish every heartbeat, for the line between a deep sleep and the grave is sometimes only an accidental snore apart. The vault sleep. What is the most terrifying sound you could hear in a freezing morgue? Not the wind whistling through the cracks, nor the silence of souls. It is the rustling of a body bag moving from the inside. Look at freezer drawer number 14, where a corpse has lain still for 11 hours in freezing temperatures. Suddenly, the black plastic trembles. A pale hand pushes the zipper. How could a heart that stopped beating, a body issued a death certificate, revive amidst the bone-chilling mist of the tomb? Is this a miracle, or a fatal medical error that you could be the next victim of? In our world, death is an absolute entity. When breath stops and pupils no longer react, you are considered to have departed this life. In November 2014, in Poland, 91-year-old Janina Kolkiewicz was found with no signs of life. A family doctor with decades of experience performed a thorough check. No pulse, no breath. Her body was as cold as winter stone. A death certificate was signed and stamped, a legal document declaring her existence on this earth officially erased. The family began funeral arrangements, and her body was sent straight into the morgue's cold storage to await burial. To everyone, Janina was now only a memory. But as the clock ticked past the 11-hour mark, reality was shattered by an unthinkable truth. A morgue attendant on a routine check froze. In the silence, the plastic bag containing Janina's corpse began to wriggle. When the zipper opened, instead of a body stiff from the frost, he saw her shivering from the cold, her eyes wide open. Janina had not crossed over to the other side. She had simply woken up from a long sleep inside a metal vault. Death, once thought to be an impassable stone wall, turned out to be a mist that Janina had accidentally walked through and returned from. How could a 91-year-old woman survive 11 hours in a giant refrigerator without brain damage or death from hypothermia? Science calls this an extreme state of hypometabolism, sometimes referred to as the Lazarus phenomenon. Imagine your body as a smartphone with exactly 0.1% battery left. To prevent a total shutdown, it automatically activates ultra power saving mode. It turns off the screen, cuts the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and maintains only a tiny current to keep its memory from being wiped. During those 11 hours, Janina's heart rate might have slowed to just 1 to 2 beats per minute, slower than the tick of a dying clock. Her blood pressure was so low that blood only leaked like a clogged faucet instead of flowing. Ironically, the morgue's cold, meant to preserve the dead, became a biological shield. It was like putting a slice of fruit in the freezer to keep it fresh. The cold slowed down the cellular destruction caused by lack of oxygen. When she woke up, the first thing she did wasn't to pray or call a doctor, but to ask for soup and pancakes, the most basic fuels to restart a biological machine that had just returned from the void. Janina Kolkiewicz went home and continued her life as if those 11 hours in the morgue were just a dreamless nap. But she left the world with a profound sense of anxiety. If a professional doctor can look death in the eye and be wrong, how many others have been sent into the darkness while their inner flame was still flickering? Is death an absolute stop, or just a mystery we are not yet qualified to decode? Cherish every breath, because the boundary between a warm bed and a cold morgue drawer is sometimes as thin as a missed heartbeat. The forgotten beat. What sound could make funeral home workers, who are all too familiar with the deceased, tremble in fear? It isn't a scream, but dry, rustling sounds coming from inside a zipped black plastic bag. Look at that bag. It is shaking. One kick, then two. The thing inside is trying to escape the thick plastic, a place reserved only for those who have taken their final breath. What questions would you ask then? Did death miss a soul? Or did modern medicine just commit one of the most horrific mistakes in history? One night in February 2014 in Mississippi, 78-year-old Walter Williams was found completely motionless. The local coroner, after performing standard tests, reached a grim conclusion: no pulse. The heart had stopped, breath had ceased. By every medical standard you know, Walter Williams had officially become a corpse. His family was drowned in tears, and his body was placed in a body bag, sent straight to the funeral home to prepare for embalming. But just as workers prepared to make the first incisions to preserve the body, reality buckled. The plastic bag rustled. Walter wasn't just breathing. He was kicking hard against the plastic surrounding him, like a child trying to break out of a cocoon. But this wasn't a spiritual rebirth. The reality unfolding before your eyes was even more terrifying. A living human being had been locked in the darkness of a body bag for hours, marked as dead while his brain was still functioning. How could someone with no pulse or breath come back so forcefully? The key lay in Walter's pacemaker. Imagine your heart as a symphony orchestra, and the pacemaker as the conductor holding the metronome to keep the beat. On that fateful night, this conductor may have suffered a serious beat error. When Walter's pulse became as faint as a whisper in a screaming stadium, the forensic staff couldn't hear a thing. His blood pressure was so low that, by comparison, it was lighter than a feather resting on skin. His body entered a state of apparent death, an extreme power-saving mode, like a laptop that has shut down but still has a few hidden percentage points of battery. It is possible that the vibrations during the transport to the funeral home jolted the pacemaker back into action, much like slapping an old radio to make it play. The biological battery in Walter's chest sent a sudden current, forcing the heart to contract again. Walter woke up in the darkness of the body bag, facing humanity's most primal fear, being buried alive. Walter Williams gained an extra 15 days of life after his great trick on death before he truly passed away 2 weeks later. His story is not just an anecdote about survival, but a haunting question about our certainty. If a body bag can shake, how much of the silence in a cemetery is actually a desperate, unheard struggle? The knock on the coffin. What sound makes the blood in your veins turn to ice? Not the wailing of relatives, nor the sound of earth falling onto a grave. It is the rhythmic tap, tap, tap coming from inside a tightly nailed wooden coffin. On June 9, 2023, in Ecuador, the mournful atmosphere of a wake was suddenly ripped apart. The coffin lid vibrated. The woman inside, Bella Montoya, who should have been a cold corpse for the last 5 hours, was using her last ounce of strength to knock on the door of the abyss. How could a modern hospital issue a death certificate for a heart that still yearned to live? When doctors at Martin y Casa Hospital announced that Bella Montoya had passed away after an ischemic stroke, the world around her began to crumble. The heart monitor showed a flat line. Survival reflexes vanished. According to standard medical protocol, once the heart stops and the lungs cease to expand, she was no longer a person, she was a cadaver. Bella's family received her body and began to prepare a proper funeral. But this is where reality bent to the point of madness. For 5 hours, lying in the narrow darkness of the wooden box, Bella did not decompose. Instead, she was undergoing a biological prison break that no one noticed. Relatives praying around the coffin suddenly heard gasping, struggling breaths. When the lid was pried open, they didn't see a stiff corpse. They saw Bella with her mouth open, gasping for every ounce of oxygen, her chest heaving to the utter shock of the crowd. Death, it turned out, was just a clumsy lie of fate. Why could medicine be so catastrophically wrong? The answer lies in the mechanism of the ischemic stroke Bella suffered. Imagine your brain as a massive modern city. A stroke is like an explosion at the main power substation, causing the entire city's grid to collapse. In this state, the body can fall into a phenomenon called catalepsy. During this, your heart rate slows to a point where it cannot be felt by hand, like trying to hear a needle drop in the middle of a construction site. Blood pressure drops so deep that the blood flowing through the veins is like a thin thread, leading doctors to believe the pump has failed completely. The pressure of the stroke hijacked the nervous system, putting Bella into ultra-power saving mode. Her body was like a laptop that had shut down, but was actually still running a few final battery percentages in the background. For 5 hours in the coffin, her life simmered in silence, as slow as a hibernating reptile, protecting her final cells from total collapse before she regained consciousness and knocked on the wooden walls. Bella Montoya was rushed back to the intensive care unit, but the miracle did not last forever. A week later, the city and her brain truly lost power for good. Her story forced the Ecuadorian Ministry of Health to launch a massive investigation into death certification protocols so that there would be no more victims like Bella. Reborn from the bag. Zip. The sound of the body bag echoed dryly, tearing through the silence of the funeral home. Inside was Timesha Beauchamp, a 20-year-old girl, her skin pale, believed to have stopped breathing 2 hours prior. The embalmer picked up his tools, preparing the procedure to drain her blood and replace it with chemicals. But at that exact moment, a cold chill ran down his spine. The corpse's eyes suddenly snapped wide open. Her chest heaved, gasping for air in desperation. How could a professional emergency team, equipped with the most modern devices, pack a living person into a body bag like a broken toy. On August 23, 2020, in Southfield, Michigan, Timesha was found unconscious. The medical team arrived and performed CPR for 30 intense minutes. No pulse, no reaction. A doctor confirmed over the phone, she's gone. According to every medical rule, when a specialist says dead, it is the indisputable end. The family collapsed in grief, and Timesha was wrapped in cold black plastic to be moved to her final destination. At the James H. Cole Funeral Home, as staff prepared for embalming, a task intended only for those whose souls have departed, they noticed the unthinkable. The plastic bag was not still. Timesha wasn't just alive, she was staring straight at them like a silent plea for help. Death, once thought to be a solid stone wall, turned out to be a thin curtain that those tasked with saving her life had accidentally overlooked. This truth was not just shocking, it exposed a fatal flaw in the city's emergency procedures. What really happened in that room? Look at our brain as a massive city that needs a constant current of oxygen to stay alive. When Timesha was mistakenly declared dead, the power was cut, but the city hadn't fully collapsed. During her time in the body bag, her brain was like a phone running out of battery, clinging to every last percentage point in the dark. The emergency responders missing her breath was like an engineer declaring a building had collapsed just because the hallway lights were off, while thousands were still breathing inside. The consequences of this negligence were more horrific than any horror movie. Timesha lived for another 6 weeks with her brain crushed by prolonged oxygen deprivation, a heavy price for a few minutes of poor observation. By January 2026, the city of Southfield agreed to pay $3.25 million to settle a lawsuit with her family. This is equivalent to the value of 15 of the most expensive Ferraris combined, but even a mountain of gold cannot fix a brain hijacked by negligence. Legal reports unveiled that her vital signs had been inexplicably ignored from the start. Timesha Beauchamp eventually passed away for good, but her story leaves a deep scar on the medical industry. It reminds us that even when science holds the keys to life, humans sometimes forget to check if the door is truly locked. Can you fully trust a declaration of death in the future? Or is the boundary between being saved and being sent to the morgue as thin as a single breath missed in the hustle of the job? Remember, silence is sometimes not the end, but a forgotten cry for help in the dark. The world is still full of hidden truths and stories that defy belief. If you're ready to uncover more of the most incredible and disturbing mysteries of our history, subscribe to Oddplain. Don't let the next story pass you by. Join us, and let's explore the unknown together. Thank you for watching, and stay curious. Goodbye.